here are 5 of the wildest MMA stories ever told on the Joe Rogan podcast. In episode number 1906 of the Joe Rogan Experience, the air felt heavier than usual. That kind of silence that sits between words when something important is about to be said. The microphones were there, the cameras rolling, but it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a meditation on greatness, not the kind that shines under bright lights, but the kind that bleeds quietly in the dark. This wasn't about medals or belts, it was about what it truly costs to become the best. The obsession, the chaos, and the unrelenting will to conquer not just the opponent across the cage, but the one staring back from the mirror.
Greatness begins long before the arena fills. It starts in empty gyms at dawn when the lights flicker to life and the sound of gloves against leather echoes like the ticking of a clock. That's where the unseen war is fought. The smell of sweat and tape, the sting of repetition, the voice that says stop and the one that answers not yet. For every fighter the world calls a champion, there are 1,000 rounds no one ever saw. Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson was the kind of fighter who didn't need to roar to be heard. His greatness lived in precision, a mastery so pure it seemed unnatural. He fought like an engineer designs a bridge. Every strike built on calculation, every movement a study in geometry and grace. His body was a blueprint for balance. His timing so exact that opponents looked mechanical beside him. In the flyweight division, a place where speed outpaces strength, Johnson became the embodiment of perfection. To watch him fight was to watch a craftsman at work. Someone who didn't chase chaos but refined it, trimmed it, sculpted it into something almost divine. But perfection, for all its beauty, is fragile. It's something you maintain, not something you conquer. And in the same sport where one man builds precision, another builds destruction. Jon Jones was destruction incarnate. He moved like a ghost but hit like gravity. His arms were too long, his reach too unfair, his instincts too raw to fit inside a normal human frame. He wasn't trained to win, he was born for it. And that's what made him terrifying. There's a story about how he went into one of the toughest fights of his career against Alexander Gustafsson, without training, without a real camp, without preparation, and he still won. That's not skill, that's something darker, something primal, a kind of genius that doesn't obey the rules of the world around it. When Jones walked into a cage, there was a sense that you were witnessing inevitability, that no matter what the opponent did, the story was already written. He didn't fight with precision like Mighty Mouse. He fought with inevitability, a gravitational pull that dragged his opponents into the void whether they liked it or not. But greatness rarely comes without cost. Jon Jones was chaos personified, a man at war with his own brilliance. He had talent that outpaced his discipline, a storm that couldn't be contained. Yet, somehow, when the cage door closed, all of that madness transformed into something unstoppable. Inside that 8-sided prison, he was pure control, chaos harnessed, pain converted into motion. And it made people wonder, is greatness something you train or something you survive? Then there were fighters like Dominic Reyes, men who touched the edge of immortality but couldn't hold on. Reyes fought Jones and took him to the brink. For 5 rounds, the balance wavered, precision met chaos, and for the first time, Jones looked human. When it ended, half the world believed Reyes had won, but the scorecards told another story. After that night, something in him broke. He lost again, and again. The man who nearly dethroned a legend became a symbol of how thin the line is between greatness and obscurity. The higher you climb, the faster you fall. And then came Ryan Spann, a fighter who for years lived in the shadow of his own potential. He was strong, gifted, but never prepared. He feared running out of gas. He feared the moment when effort would meet exhaustion. So he held back. Until one day, he didn't. For the first time, he committed, fully trained fully, and when he stepped into the cage against Dominic Reyes, the transformation was frightening. Spann moved with purpose. No hesitation, no self-doubt. He lit Reyes up like a fuse, finishing him in the first round. In that moment, the sport saw the oldest truth come alive again. Talent is nothing without discipline, and discipline is everything when talent runs dry. But even among all these names, Mighty Mouse, Jones, Reyes, Spann, one stood apart. A man who turned combat into devotion, Khabib Nurmagomedov, He didn't rise from fame or chaos or self-destruction. He rose from discipline carved into his bones since childhood. Born in the mountains of Dagestan, raised on the edges of hardship, Khabib learned early that control of the body begins with control of the mind. He fought not for fame, not for spectacle, but for purpose. Every strike, every choke, every breath he took inside the cage was another offering to that purpose. Before his fight with Conor McGregor, the world saw a glimpse of what that purpose looked like. McGregor, the showman, the provocateur, the master of the mental war, tried to break him with words. The weigh-ins became a theater of chaos. Fans booed, flags waved. And in the middle of that storm, Khabib stood motionless. "I'm gonna smash your boy," he said, calmly, like he was reciting a truth already known. And when the night came, he did exactly that. When the bell rang, McGregor tried to find rhythm, distance, swagger, but there is no rhythm against inevitability. Khabib closed the space, took him down, and dragged him into the deep, that cold place where breath burns and the body begins to panic. It was not rage that fueled him, it was duty. When the fight ended, when his fists rained down, his voice echoed above the noise. "Let's talk now." It wasn't a taunt, it was judgment. That night, he didn't just win a fight, he ended an era. And then, as quietly as he came, he left. Undefeated, untouched, uncompromised. There are champions who fight for legacy, and there are warriors who fight for something pure, a peace that comes only after proving themselves to no one but God. Khabib was the latter. Greatness is not one thing. It's a spectrum, a living force that takes shape through whoever dares to chase it. For some, like Mighty Mouse, it's found in perfection, the elegant control of every variable. For others, like John Jones, it's found in chaos, the will to dominate no matter the cost. For Khabib, it's in devotion, the surrender of ego to something greater. Each represents a fragment of what it means to push beyond human limits. But beneath their stories lies the same heartbeat, the refusal to quit. Because greatness isn't just the highlight reel, it's the mornings when the body aches too much to move, but still moves anyway. It's the fear before the fight that no one ever sees, the loneliness after the victory that no one ever admits. It's every sacrifice made in silence families missed, friendships lost, futures gambled. The truth is, greatness is ugly up close. It's not gold belts or press conferences. It's broken bones wrapped in tape. It's hunger so deep that it consumes the rest of your life. But in that hunger lies meaning. And meaning, in a world as brutal as this, is everything. The fighters that endure, they don't chase perfection, they chase purpose. Mighty Mouse found his in craft. Jones found his in chaos. Khabib found his in faith. And in their search, each one touched something eternal, the purest form of human drive. So when people ask who's the greatest, maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe greatness isn't a person, or a record, or a name. Maybe it's a condition, a fever that burns only in a few. The ones who wake up before dawn, the ones who fail, break, and come back stronger. The ones who live inside the grind long after others have gone home. They don't chase the belt, they chase the moment where suffering becomes peace. That's what separates them, and that's why we keep watching. Because somewhere inside each of us, there's a piece that recognizes that struggle, that wants to see what happens when a human being gives everything they have and then gives a little more. The cage, the crowd, the noise, it's all just ritual. The real fight happens long before the bell rings. It happens in the mirror, in the silence, in the small, private wars that forge the unbreakable.
When the lights fade and the crowd disappears, the noise dies too. What's left is a heartbeat, slow, steady, defiant. Greatness doesn't end with a victory. It begins again in the dark when no one's watching. Because the greatest fights aren't won in the arena. They're won in the quiet moments where a man decides he's not finished yet. In episode Hazoni 5-2 of the Joe Rogan Experience MMA show, the talk wasn't about punches, kicks, or belts. It was about the unseen war, the one that happens behind the eyes, before the bell rings, long before the first strike lands. Inside, every fighter lives another fight, the struggle to stay present when fear, memory, and doubt all try to drag the mind away. For Sean Brady, that war nearly cost him everything, and learning how to win it changed what it means to step into the cage.
Every fighter remembers the first time the noise in his head drowned out the sound of the crowd. For Sean Brady, it happened in a place that was supposed to feel familiar: the cage, the spotlight, the rhythm of combat. Yet somewhere in the middle of the fight, his focus fractured. His body was there, but his mind was somewhere else. It's a strange kind of disconnection, one that few can explain unless they've lived it. You're moving, blocking, breathing, but you're not there. The punches come, and instead of instinct, you feel distance, a strange fog between thought and action. It isn't fear, not exactly. It's absence. Brady remembers it vividly. The blur, the drifting thoughts, the realization that he was fighting and somehow not fighting. The crowd existed in another universe. His opponent's movements arrived seconds late in his awareness, like echoes in a cave. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was just gone. Mentally, in another fight against Kelvin Gaston, things had been different. He had been locked in, every heartbeat measured, every motion grounded. He had felt the world shrink to a single point. 2 feet on canvas. One opponent, one goal, presence, true presence, but in the next bout, something changed. Somewhere between training sessions and expectations, he lost that stillness. He entered the cage thinking of everything but the moment. What came next? What went wrong last week? The body obeyed. The mind wandered. And in a sport where seconds decide careers, that was enough. After that night, he understood that the opponent across the cage wasn't always the problem. Sometimes the real battle began before the first bell. That's when he turned inward. He found Brian Cain, a mental performance coach known for rebuilding the minds of champions. Cain had once helped Georgia's St. Pierre find his footing after the brutal loss to Matt Serra, a moment that could have broken any fighter. What he taught GSP wasn't about aggression or confidence. It was about presence, being where your feet are. That phrase would become a mantra for Sean Brady, a simple instruction with impossible depth. Be where your feet are. In the gym. In the cage. In life. Don't chase the next moment. Master this one. The training began not with weights, but with awareness. Each sparring round had new layers. It wasn't just combinations or takedowns, it was self-monitoring. Recognizing when the mind drifted and bringing it back, Cain used a method borrowed from baseball, a system of internal traffic lights: green, yellow, red, green. Everything flows. You're sharp, alive, in control. Yellow, you start to tighten. Thoughts creep in. The body hesitates. Red, the spiral. You're gone. Lost in frustration, distraction, fatigue. The goal wasn't to avoid red, but to recognize it, to build a mental switch that could pull him back to center. In baseball, a batter steps out of the box, taps his shoulder, resets. In fighting, there's no time for rituals, but there are words. Small, powerful phrases whispered inside the skull. You're here. You're good. You're fine. Brady learned to talk himself home. He created affirmations, not motivational quotes, but coded reminders of control. I control what I can control. I trust my training. I'm aggressive and always moving forward. And then, to keep the tension from turning to fear, I'm confident. I'm cocky. I'm rocky. Sounded ridiculous at first, but the mind listens when the body laughs. The humor loosened the grip of anxiety. The words became anchors, each one pulling him back from drift. Before fights, he'd stand in the locker room, whispering those lines until they weren't words anymore, just rhythm. A heartbeat he could feel beneath the noise of the arena. But presence wasn't only about affirmation. It was about rehearsal, so Brady began to visualize, not casually but with the precision of a ritual. Every week, he and his new coach, Brandon Epstein, would build the fight in his mind from start to finish. Began in the shower, hours before the real event, where nerves were sharpest, where the quiet was loudest. He'd close his eyes, feel the heat of the water, and imagine what came next: the car ride, the locker room, the tape wrapping his hands, the smell of liniment, the muffled bass of walkout music through concrete walls, the slow tightening of gloves. He would live the fight without moving an inch. The mind, they say, doesn't distinguish between imagined and real experience. Each repetition carved new grooves into his nervous system. Each visualized punch, each breath of anxiety, became another rep in a different kind of gym, and he didn't only imagine victory. He imagined chaos, getting rocked, getting stuffed on a takedown, hearing the crowd gasp, feeling his lungs seize from panic. He saw it all, then saw himself recovering, breathing, resetting, winning anyway, because true control isn't never falling. It's learning how to fall and rise again before it happens. Over time, those visual rounds built something muscle couldn't: composure. When the fight day came, it no longer felt foreign. The locker room was familiar. The crowd noise wasn't chaos. It was déjà vu. His body had been here 1,000 times already to seal the illusion. They crafted custom soundtracks, blending his walkout music. His opponent's entrance, the crowd's roar, layered into one immersive score. He'd shadowbox to it, spar to it, let it bleed into his bones. By the time the real walk began, it was just another repetition, and in those repetitions, something shifted. The anxiety that once dominated fight week began to dissolve. The what-ifs became instructions. The fear became focused. It was a quiet transformation, not the kind the fans saw, but the kind every fighter dreams of: to step into chaos and feel calm, because fighting isn't about violence. It's about control of space, control of breath, control of thought. Sean Brady had spent his early career perfecting the body, the takedowns, the transitions, the conditioning that broke other men. But now he was learning that the mind was the final muscle. Each training session became a meditation. Each strike a chance to test presence. When a round went wrong, instead of panic, he reset, breathe, you're still here. When sparring partners landed clean, he didn't crumble, he adjusted, he carried the mental traffic lights. Everywhere. Green meant flow, effortless action, yellow meant awareness. A cue to check his focus, red meant reset, a call to breathe. Recenter, restart. The system followed him out of the cage and into life. When driving, if his thoughts wandered, he'd pull himself back. When walking his dog, he'd leave the phone behind, feeling each step on the pavement as an act of mindfulness. Every moment was training. Every second was another rep at staying here, because presence, he learned, is a discipline, not a mood. Not luck. It's forged, one conscious breath at a time. And when the next fight came, the one after the loss, the difference was visible. He walked to the cage with a calmness that wasn't confidence, it was surrender. Not to defeat, but to the moment. The crowd was thunder, but he heard his breath. The lights were blinding, but he saw his path. When the door closed, he didn't think of what came next. He simply existed inside the next 5 seconds. Somewhere in those seconds lies the essence of all mastery across every sport, every art, every pursuit. The great ones speak of flow, of losing themselves in the act. But it isn't losing, really. It's merging. The self disappears. Only motion remains. For a fighter, that's the sacred place. The zone where instinct overrides thought, where the body becomes language, but it's fragile. One stray worry, one lingering fear, and it shatters. That's why Brady's practice mattered. He wasn't trying to become fearless. He was training to coexist with fear, to see it, acknowledge it, and move anyway. When he stepped back into competition, those mental reps paid off. He no longer carried yesterday into today. He no longer tried to control what couldn't be. He simply met each moment as it came. The fight unfolded like his visualizations, not perfectly, but faithfully. He got tagged. He recovered. He adjusted. He heard the voice in his head, I control what I can control, and the body obeyed. That's what presence does. It turns panic into patience. It turns chaos into clarity. Every punch, every breath, every heartbeat became a metronome, a rhythm of control that no opponent could interrupt. Later, when he spoke about the change, he didn't call it magic. He called it work, because that's what mental training is. Invisible labor that rewires how a man meets the world. He said the hardest part wasn't fighting. It was staying here, now, because even outside the cage, the noise of life keeps coming. The texts, the news, the endless scroll of distraction. Fighting, he realized, was just a reflection of everything else. The goal was always the same: to be present in whatever storm you stand inside. That's why he left his phone behind on walks. Why he breathed slower in traffic. Why he let silence stretch longer in conversations. Each small moment was another cage, another chance to train awareness. Because presence isn't something you bring into a fight. It's something you live, and when you live it long enough, the cage becomes just another room, the noise becomes music, the fear becomes fueled in the end. That's what separates fighters from survivors. Champions from contenders, not strength, not skill, but stillness. Stillness in the storm. Brady's story is more than one fighter's evolution. It's a reminder that the mind can sabotage the body, but it can also save it. That victory begins the moment you decide to return to this breath. This second, this heartbeat, and in that instant, everything aligns.
In the cage, the lights burn bright, but inside the mind, another light flickers smaller, steadier, harder to hold. The fighter who learns to keep that flame alive wins long before the scorecards are read. Because when the noise fades and the crowd disappears, what remains isn't power or fame. It's presence, the quiet, relentless truth of a man completely here. In episode number 98 of the Joe Rogan Experience MMA show, the question wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about legacy, about what it means to be flawless in a sport built on chaos. Two names echoed through the air that night: Khabib Nurmagomedov and Jon Jones. One, a man who never bled, never broke, never lost. The other, a storm that refused to obey order, reckless, raw, and yet undeniably brilliant. Between them lies the riddle of greatness itself. Is perfection the highest form of mastery, or does true greatness come from surviving your own destruction and still returning to win?
The fight game is chaos disguised as order, a storm of motion and will wrapped in the illusion of control. Every once in a while, a man steps into that chaos and makes it look effortless. Khabib Nurmagomedov was that man. In a sport where even the best bleed, where luck can topple genius in a heartbeat, Khabib walked through 29 fights and came out untouched, never cut, never dropped, never broken. To understand what that means, you have to understand the nature of the cage. It's not built for mercy. It's built for entropy, for the collapse of certainty. Every strike, every takedown, every breath risks collapse. And yet, through every storm, Khabib remained immovable. Against Justin Gaethje, one of the most violent, precise strikers in the modern era, he didn't just survive. He dominated. Gaethje's leg kicks are weapons that dismantle careers. Fighters crumble under them, cartilage separating from bone after a handful of those low, vicious swings. Khabib took them. He didn't step back. He didn't flinch. He closed the distance, swallowed the pain, and changed the fight in 22 seconds. The world saw why his name is whispered differently. A leg kick landed. Khabib countered with a level change, a double leg takedown that seemed routine until it wasn't, in a blur. He lifted, posted, and rotated. Gaethje's arms went wide to defend, a mistake. That moment created the smallest pocket of space, and Khabib moved like water into it. Hooks, control, transition, fake head and arm triangle to open Gaethje's guard, then the real choke, tight, clean, merciful, because mercy for Khabib was not weakness, it was faith. He could have broken Gaethje's arm in front of his parents. Instead, he let him sleep 20-2 seconds from strike to silence. That was all it took. For Khabib, the fight wasn't violence, it was obedience. The discipline of years of repetition until instinct became scripture. He was not fueled by rage or fame or money. He was fueled by devotion to his craft, to his father, to his faith. He fought to uphold something purer than glory. When his father died, that purpose became sacred. His final fight was not a performance. It was a farewell, and then he walked away, undefeated, unscarred, unchallenged. That is one version of greatness, the clean version. The perfect line, but then there is Jon Jones, the other extreme, where Khabib was stillness. Jones was motion, where Khabib built order. Jones thrived in chaos, Khabib was a monk. Jones was a wildfire. He became the youngest champion in UFC history to 23 years old, crowned against legends whose names built the sport: Mauricio Shogun Rua, Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans. Each man fell not because they were weak, but because Jones redefined what dominance meant. His arms stretched like wings, his strikes were geometry defied. Elbows from impossible angles, trips and throws from other disciplines woven into a style that belonged only to him. For years, no one touched him. Rounds disappeared. Opponents entered confident and left questioning reality, and yet, behind the perfection, something else lived: chaos where Khabib lived by rules. Jones broke them. He didn't train properly. He partied, he drifted, he lived dangerously. But somehow, in the cage, that chaos became art. Against Alexander Gustafsson, the storm almost broke him. Gustafsson met him blow for blow, even took him down, something no one had done before. By the fourth round, Jones was exhausted, bloodied, his lungs burning. But even half prepared, he found a way to win. That's what separates him. The ability to stand inside the wreckage of his own making and still conquered. It's why his story fascinates. Because it's not just about talent, it's about defiance. He took down Daniel Cormier, an Olympic wrestler, built like discipline itself. No one takes Cormier down. John did, then he did it again and again in one of the sport's defining moments. He head-kicked Cormier into unconsciousness. It would later be ruled a no contest, stained by controversy, but the moment remains. The strike landed clean, perfect, final. That's the paradox of Jon Jones. Every time he seemed untouchable, his own chaos followed him back into the shadows: suspensions, arrests, nightmares outside the cage. And yet, when the door closed, he was untouchable again. Where Khabib's greatness was pure, Jones's was polluted but undeniable. That's what makes the debate impossible. Two men, opposite paths converging on the same summit. Khabib's record gleams like polished steel: 29 wins, number losses, no scars. He lost perhaps 2 rounds in his entire career. Never knocked down, never even truly threatened. That kind of perfection doesn't happen by chance. It's a lifetime of submission, to the grind, to control, to mastery. Jon Jones's record tells a different story: 27 wins. 1 loss that wasn't a loss, a disqualification from a fight he was dominating. But unlike Khabib, his path is uneven. His resume is longer, deeper, filled with chaos and controversy, but also greatness in its purest athletic form. He didn't just beat legends. He reinvented divisions. That's why fans argue. One has flawlessness. The other has history. To never bleed is one kind of miracle. To bleed and still win, that's another. For Khabib, the cage was a temple. Every round a prayer, every takedown a verse in the long scripture of discipline. His life was monotone in the most beautiful way. No indulgence, no distraction, no ego. When he spoke, it was calm, almost prophetic. "I'm gonna smash your boy." And he did. He took McGregor's venom and turned it into silence. He turned Githja's violence into peace. He left with nothing left to prove. Jon Jones stayed. And because he stayed, he fell. And because he fell, he rose again. He fought Thiago Santos on one leg, Santos with knees torn to pieces, still swinging bombs. The fight went to a split decision. Jones barely escaped. Then came Dominic Reyes, young, hungry, fearless. For 3 rounds, Reyes outworked him. But when exhaustion came, Jones took over. That's what champions do. Those were cracks, yes. But even the cracks tell stories, because greatness isn't always clean. Sometimes it bleeds, sometimes it sins, sometimes it crawls through its own wreckage and keeps moving forward. If Khabib represents mastery without flaw, Jones represents survival without surrender. 2 philosophies, 2 paths to immortality. But legacy isn't just built on records. It's built on presence. Khabib's presence was silence. When he fought, arenas felt smaller, time slower. The fight was over before it began. Opponents didn't just lose. They vanished. Every movement had purpose. Every victory felt inevitable. Jon's presence was the opposite: chaotic, electric, dangerous. When he walked out, it wasn't inevitability the crowd felt. It was unpredictability. You didn't know what he would do or who he would be that night, but you knew you would remember it. Both men carried the burden of divinity in different ways. Khabib was worshipped for his purity. John was feared for his imperfection. And maybe that's the real question: greatness about being perfect? Or is it about being unkillable? Khabib's career was a closed circle, perfect, complete, untarnished. He retired with his father's legacy sealed behind him. John Jones's story is still being written, his flaws open, his chaos unresolved, but that's what makes him human. The truth is, sports need the saint and the sinner. They need the immaculate and the reckless, because together they form the complete picture of the human spirit, the unbreakable and the uncontainable. When the question comes, who's the GOAT? Maybe there's no answer because there's no single shape to greatness. Khabib built his on devotion. John built his on defiance. One fought to honor his father, the other fought to prove that even his own demons couldn't stop him. One walked away undefeated, the other kept walking through every scandal, every mistake, and somehow still finds ways to win. It's faith versus fire, order versus chaos, stillness versus movement. Khabib's story ended in light, in prayer, in peace. John's story burns in the dark, messy, dangerous, alive, and maybe that's why their rivalry matters, because between them lies every possible version of greatness we can imagine. Khabib teaches us that perfection is possible if you live with purpose. John teaches us that redemption is possible if you refuse to die when the lights dim and the fans argue. Both names remain. One is the calm before the storm, the other the storm itself. In a world built on violence, both found ways to make it art.
Greatness doesn't live in numbers or belts. It lives in the way the world goes silent when two men step into the unknown and write something we'll never forget. Khabib left the cage untouched, a symbol of control. John Jones remains inside it, proof that chaos can still create kings. Maybe greatness isn't about choosing between them. Maybe it's about understanding that both perfection and imperfection can touch the divine, just in different ways. High in the Caucasus, the wind bites harder than the cold, and boys learn to breathe through fatigue before they learn to count victories. From those mountains to the bright wash of the octagon lights, a lineage of wrestlers, sambo savants, and relentlessness has poured into MMA like a flood. This isn't a story about hype, it's a story about inevitability of systems, culture, and a people who turn hardship into a training partner. Watch closely, and you can see it. Dagestan didn't arrive. It emerged methodical, disciplined, and built to last.
It begins far from pay-per-view numbers and championship belts, where dirt roads narrow into goat paths and the mornings taste like iron. The room is small, the ceiling low, the windows fogged from breath. Chalk dust blooms from a barbell clattering on raw concrete. On a mat no larger than a living room, boys in faded shorts trace circles with bare feet, hips low, shoulders loose, eyes forward. 30 minutes before practice begins, they fold their bodies through the grammar of gymnastics, cartwheels and back bridges, handstands, crab walks, hollow holds. They are learning how to be weightless and then how to carry the world. They are not waiting for talent to arrive. They are building it. Dagestan's single quotes greatness is not a secret. It is a system. Morning, midday, evening practice as ritual, repetition as faith. The day is trifold: mobility to teach control, grind to teach endurance, drilling to teach inevitability. No one speaks of shortcuts because no one knows any. Here, the lonely arithmetic of sweat replaces slogans. Here, boys who will become men learn a truth that the octagon later reveals. If you teach the body discipline, the mind follows and the will has nowhere else to go but forward. Wrestling is the root. Not a sport, but a spine that holds the rest. In these rooms, wrestling is not about the 2 points you score. It is about the minute you do not break. It is the humble certainty of hips lower than the next man's, forehead in his chest, breath calm while his storms themselves out. In time, sambo layers over the wrestling throws from fabric grips, foot sweeps from jacket ties, the shockproof chain between clinch and canvas. Punches and kicks live inside this system like punctuation in a sentence already decided. by the time mixed martial arts arrives, the language has been learned. As only the translation to understand this dominance. You can start with a single man, an Olympian, who climbed every mountain except the one that would not move. He remembers the semifinal not for the score, but for the tempo of another human being who refused to tire. A man from the same granite world who never stopped, never paused, never questioned, never sought oxygen as a friend. Work thrown at him came back doubled. He was a world champion many times over and moved like water through rock. He didn't fight in a cage. He didn't have to. He had already wrestled the world and mapped its tendencies. Placed that man's motor, mindset, and mechanics inside a 4-ounce glove, and there would be no conversation. The Olympian knows this in his bones. He felt it on the mat where all pretense dies and only truth remains, and still, the truth did not stay in the mountains. It traveled through visas and gulfs of language, through cramped vans that smelled of rubber and eucalyptus, through invitations and handshakes that became open doors. A coach who once lifted a gold medal now lifted a generation, and the generation answered. The rooms filled. The rhythm continued, morning, midday, evening, not drills anymore, but inheritance. The lineage touched places it had never been. A youth team from across the world arrived, wrapped in borrowed winter coats, eyes wide with the kind of fear that only lasts until the first takedown. They were children 7, 8, 13, and the mountains took them in without ceremony. 30 minutes of tumbling before a whistle ever blew. 30 minutes of learning not to fight gravity, but to borrow it. They ate like fighters, slept like farmers, and woke like men with appointments on the calendar of their own future. The mats didn't care what language they spoke. The drill said enough. A champion opened his gym to them. He paid for rooms, fed them bowls of warmth that tasted like family and fuel. He said only this, "Get here." The rest would handle itself. On those mats, they learned the economy of effort. Do not waste. Do not rush. Do not fear fatigue. It will fear you if you meet it every day at dawn, at noon, at dusk. Across that month, home became a word that meant sweat, breath, and the simple satisfaction of a day's work done correctly. Behind the technique, and triumph is a psychology as quiet as a prayer. The traffic lights of the mine green, yellow, red are taught not in classrooms but in contact. Green is flow, yellow is doubt, red is panic. The system builds a lever into the soul that pulls red back to yellow and yellow to green. Not through tricks but through thresholds crossed so often the body can't remember being turned away. Where others see pressure, these men see protocol, head position beats panic. Underhooks beat fear. The fence is not a wall. It is a surface to climb. The crowd is noise, but noise is air, and air is something you breathe. Calm is not an accident. It is a decision made early and often, especially when the lungs bargain. Dominance is often misread as destiny. In truth, it is logistics. Watch the chain against the cage, the level change that sells the double. The hands that slide from the knees to the waist to the wrist to the floor. The post stolen so the wall can no longer be a friend. The hands plant and the hips replace them. A hook like a comma, the other like an answer. The bait of a head and arm that is never meant to finish but to widen the ribs. A chair sit not as flair but as function. The triangle not as cruelty but as mercy because the alternative screams in a mother's eyes. 22 seconds from strike to stillness. It feels like magic. It is math. If you want to understand why the octagon bent, consider a single adjustment in a fight that rewrote expectations. A southpaw feint lifts the guard. A step outside the lead foot builds the lane. A left leg rises for the body and climbs to the head midway through travel, disguised not by speed alone but by pattern, repetition that lulled, variation that punished. The head kick arrived unannounced because it had been introduced 100 times as a different guest. The cameras caught a champion falling as if remembering gravity for the first time. The system, having learned to punch last, still punched as if it had always known how. The fear that once lived in rooms with no heat now moves down airline aisles in the eyes of opponents, who know what is coming and cannot stop it. They know about the jacket and shorts and shoes. They watched the throws that required cloth and made sense even without it. They know the fence is an accomplice when a man from the mountains brings you there. They know breath will become currency, that interest compounds against those who spend too quickly. They know because film exists, because habits travel, because the cage is not magic. It is memory. And memory belongs to those who have made more of it. But domination is not merely about mechanics. It is about volume. There is a pipe now, thick as a trunk, reaching from the Caucasus to the cage. The first generation arrived with awe and silence. The second came with certainty. The third will come with expectation. Boys who grow up watching heroes lift belts now understand that belts are not jewelry. They are tools the system uses to move the world closer. If your neighbor can do it, you can do it. If your cousin can do it, you must. The pipeline widens. The rooms swell. The road narrows only to separate the committed from the curious in another part of the world. A coach built a room inside a school where a television plays a sermon disguised as an argument. Wrestle if you want to know yourself. Wrestle if you want to learn the limit of your fear. Wrestle if you want to stand alone and discover that alone is enough. The children listen because the room insists. When they step onto the mat, they meet the version of themselves that cannot be lied to. Everyone should have one honest fight in a lifetime. The lesson says not to hurt someone else, but to stop lying to yourself. Sparring jujitsu? Wrestling. A human being should once be pitted against resistance with nothing but breath and will between them. After that, the rest of life arrives smaller. This philosophy is why the region's men carry themselves like quiet weather systems. They do not need to announce storms. They are storms. Their discipline is monastic without romance, their morality pragmatic without performance. Many do not drink because fogged minds miss details. Many do not party because mornings arrive early and demand-proof. They miss weight early in careers and correct it the way they correct grip placement by never missing again. They do not train for fights so much as they live a life that makes fights the easiest part of the week, and yet, the contrast is part of the story's gravity. In a sport where chaos often crowns kings, the Dagestani method crowns constancy. The wild men are still out there, the ones who train when it is convenient and still find ways to win because the body is a freak and the timing feels like destiny. They will always be dangerous because entropy blesses opportunists. But the mountain does not care about opportunists. It erodes them slowly. The pipeline from the Caucasus is erosion with purpose, patient, unromantic, incorrigible. Wildness wins nights. Systems win eras. To call it invasion is to miss the point. Invasions are sudden. This was inevitable. The global sport still young enough to be rewritten every few years, met a culture that has trained for centuries to solve human problems with leverage and lungs. The first wave proved the concept. Pure wrestling could corral violence. Pure pressure could cancel talent if talent refused to pay full price. The second wave added ownership on the feet, patient jabs, learned kicks, layered feints. The third wave will be bilingual, hands that speak boxing and feet that speak Muay Thai, attached to hips that never forget where they were born. Each generation stands on the breath of the last. This is how dynasties are built, not by genius alone, but by infrastructure. Look closer and you will see the mercy in their violence. Mercy is not the absence of finishing. It is the manner of it. A triangle where an armbar would maim. A choke where a joint lock would ruin. Respect not as performance, but as protocol. Shake the hand, lift the head, cover the eyes from the light. For some this is theater. For others it is law. The men from these rooms do not seek to embarrass. They seek to enforce. There is a difference and you can feel it in your bones when the referee steps in, and the storm ends like a door closing. For the children who flew to the mountains and came home with lungs like bellows, the change is visible in posture. Phones sit in pockets on dog walks because attention is a muscle and muscles atrophy in comfort. The lessons migrated. Be where your feet are. Build your base before you build your name. Fear is a smell and you must wash it off every day with work. You do not become unafraid by thinking differently. You become unafraid by surviving yourself. What then of the rest of the world? They adapt. They must. They turn cafeterias into wrestle rooms. They watch video of wall walks until the wall becomes a friend again. They speak the names of legends like instructions. Learn the cross wrist ride. Learn the mat return. Learn to marry strikes to level changes without telling your opponent which you have chosen. They teach their kickers how to sprawl, their boxers how to underhook, their grapplers how to jab. Mixed martial arts mutates under pressure, and pressure is what this era has delivered. The sport is better for it. The fans are luckier for it. The belts are heavier now, not because gold gained weight, but because to lift them you must pass through a place where excuses cannot breathe. History will not remember every name. It will remember the curve of a moment, a hand posting on canvas, a leg lifted, a back taken, a triangle locked while the world holds its breath. A southpaw feint disguising the last thing anyone expected. A coach in a cold room telling a child that flexibility is not a trick, it is a promise. The great arc from mountain to octagon is not made of highlights alone. It is stitched from small, unremarkable decisions repeated forever. Wake, train, respect, repeat, and when the argument circles, as it always does, wrestling or striking, the answer stands quietly in a corner, mouthguard in hand, wrestling first, everything else as leverage. Not because the hands do not matter, but because hands matter more when the hips are yours. Because panic drowns loud men and wrestling is the art of breathing underwater, dominance then is not a surprise. It is a schedule. It is a boy in a thick jacket arriving in a foreign winter to learn how to fall correctly so he will someday not fall at all. It is a champion who sends his youth team across the world because he knows culture outruns drills. It is the humility to choose a choke over a snap because victory should not leave scars when it doesn't have to. It is a region that turns scarcity into a curriculum and exports the results at championship weight. Somewhere, in a room with fogged windows, practice is ending for the night. The boys line up along the wall. They bow not to a flag, but to the work. Outside, the road is dark and the wind is angrier than yesterday. Inside, someone turns off the lights. Tomorrow morning, the lights turn on again. Morning, midday, evening, the world keeps changing, but not here. Here, rules older than belts decide outcomes. Breathe, pressure, position, finish. Repeat until your name does not matter, and your habits do. When the octagon lights swallow the shadows. When the canvas looks clean and the crowd believes in chaos again, one more man from the mountains will walk forward like he's walking home. He will take space without asking, clasp hands without hurry, and make gravity a partner. He will not announce dominance. He will demonstrate it. And when it is over, he will help the other man stand because tomorrow demands that both of them rise. This is not a trend. It is a tradition with a new passport. Call it Dagestan if you need a map. Call it wrestling if you need a language. Call it Sambo if you need a method. In the end, call it what it is. The systematic conversion of hardship into victory.
The mountain doesn't talk, it teaches, and the men who come from it do not predict the future, they prepare for it. If the octagon is a test, Dagestan turned life into the study guide and never stopped reading. What you are watching is not a wave, it's a coastline. The tide will rise and fall, but the rock remains. Morning, midday, evening, the lights come on, and the work continues. Night hums through the studio like distant stadium lights, and the conversation turns to a simple, dangerous question. What does impact really cost? Helmets gleam, gloves thud, crowds roar, but beneath the spectacle, rules sculpt our myths and hide our wounds. Some sports promise protection, others reveal consequence. And somewhere between the two lives, the truth, contact is a bargain, and the body always keeps the books.
Before the bell, before the kickoff, before the referee's hand cuts space into order, there is a pact we rarely name. We accept the thrill of impact because the rules tell us it is shaped, contained, civilized. Helmets absorb, gloves cushion. Mouthpieces align our jaw, hide our teeth, and quiet our doubt. We agree to the bargain, then forget what we paid. Football is the parable most people know. Myth wrapped in shoulder pads. Collisions announced like weather. They told us for years that equipment made it safe, that the helmet was the shield that separated courage from catastrophe. But protection alters behavior. Armor invites charge. Give a man a shell, and he will lead with it. Give two, and they will meet at speed. What looks like safety becomes leverage. What was meant to soften the blow becomes the reason to seek it. The brain, unarmored and floating, is the quiet witness to this contradiction, collecting subplots called subconcussive blows, the little taps that don't make the highlight. Real, but write the ending anyway. The film they don't play on Sundays is subtle, not spectacular knockouts, but the thousands of nudges. The head turned just so, the helmet-to-helmet skip that rings the skull without drama. Middle schoolers in borrowed gear, learning to love the sound of plastic striking plastic because the crowd loves it too. The applause is loud enough to drown the science, until the science speaks in slurred syllables and missing names. You can legislate the big hits, throw flags across yard lines like flares in a fog, but the fog has already settled. The real damage lives between whistles, layered small on small. Again and again, practice and game, season and off-season. A lint of trauma that becomes a shroud. Then there is fighting, the sport people point to when they want to see violence clearly. It wears no pretense. The geometry is honest. Two people, one space, consequences that arrive without chaperones. It is tempting to call it the more dangerous art because the impact comes as a narrative crescendo, a head kick, a straight left, a timed knee that lifts a man from his plans. But the truth is thornier. The glove is smaller, the space is tighter, and that paradox saves lives. A single clean shot ends a night. A choke ends an argument. A referee, trained to distrust hope, watches a pair of unguarded eyes and finishes the sentence. Boxing carries a different grammar. 10 counts teach courage. They also teach amnesia. In that world, a body can meet the floor, count breaths like a drowning swimmer, stand, and return to the same riddle that just emptied him. Heroism thrives here. So does accumulation. The brain learns to absorb and negotiate and misremember. The whole sport is a cathedral to recovery. Rise and we will applaud. Rise again and we will call it heart. Rise a third time, and someone you love will pick up the phone in a different decade and hear a voice they almost recognize. There are nights that prove the exception is why we watch. A mountainous man falls as if the ring tilted under him, then wakes like a saint in a stained glass window and wins the minutes we thought he didn't own anymore. In mixed martial arts, that fall would have ended the novel with a period. In boxing, it becomes a semicolon that stitches two lives together, the one before the canvas and the one after it. That's the kind of drama that makes legends and quietly invoices the real villain. Neurologists remind us isn't just the knockout. It's the hail of pebbles, not the avalanche. Sparring days done hungry. Gym wars people brag about later. The heavy bag that forgives poor mechanics. Until joints don't, the pad rounds that sell a lie, that repetition without restraint is virtue. Somewhere, a soccer pitch hums with its own evidence, children leaping toward a ball as if their foreheads were palms, discovering too early that culture can be heavy, and that the cost of joining a team can be counted years, later by doctors with soft voices. So which is worse, a single bolt from a clean punch, or 5 rounds in a rainstorm of taps that never quite wash you away? Cold math says the flash knockout is mercy. Lights out, lights on, night over. The other math, the one dressed as pride, says absorb what you can, because survival looks like victory from the cheap seats. On some nights, you want the referee who is willing to stop hoping for your sake. On others, you want the man with the count and the patience to let miracles find their legs. Rules decide which miracles we permit. Rules are choices, and choices reveal us. Break a clinch in boxing because entanglement hides violence from the paying customer. Preserve it in MM because entanglement is violence with different tools. If the only legal answer to a punch is another punch, then there is no exit but better hands. If the legal answer to a punch is a clinch, a trip, a double leg, a guard pulled like a blanket, then there is grammar for survival that doesn't require your chin to pretend. It is a shield. We forget how recent our restraint is. Once upon a time, a groin was an eligible target and a head became a hammer. There's grainy footage that looks like myth until you count the breaths. A man trapped in a headlock, another's fist dropping like a piston into the softiest of targets. The crowd half amused, half horrified, the commentary unsure if it's witnessing a sport or a confession. Headbutts carved their initials on foreheads and rulebooks alike. A heavyweight learned that the top of the skull is a fortress and used it accordingly until the rules turned it into contraband. Lethway kept the old religion. Wrapped knuckles, no gloves. Elbows like commas, knees like exclamation points, and the head, the most honest weapon, trained on pads as if the forehead were a knuckle. Tap, tap, bang. The soft tissue around the eyes learns humility. The bridge of the nose discovers the dictionary definition of the word hard. Technique is everywhere, even where we don't want to see it. You can train a head to be a fist. You can teach a clinch to be a storm shelter. You can build a fighter whose first instinct under fire is not to chase a highlight but to cancel a sentence, tie the arms, press the fence, borrow a breath. That's a safer story than the one where a referee pries you off a man you were using as a life raft and tells you to swim again. Out on the street, rules are a rumor. There is concrete, a different kind of canvas, and physics is not a fan. A clean punch doesn't ask permission from the curb. A head that misses the hand finds the ground, and suddenly you are a cautionary clip traveling the world, watched by boys who pause the video to see whether skill can conquer chaos. Sometimes it does. Often it invites it. The old jiu-jitsu tapes weren't lying. 2 boxers without a referee will grab each. Others sooner or later because the body knows what it wants under pressure. Friction, leverage, rest. Without the rule that ends in braces, the fight becomes an argument about balance and choices. Can you stop my fall? Becomes the only question worth asking. In that environment, wrestling isn't a style so much as an accent you cannot fake. You can hear it in a man's posture, in the way his feet speak to the floor, in the habit his hips have of sitting below trouble. Cauliflower ears are a warning label, but they are also old news. The real tells are quieter. Neck like a post, eyes that don't blink when distance collapses, the comfort to accept collision without apology. Wrestlers learn early that panic is a luxury, that breath is a resource. That comfort is something you earn in positions other people rent. What they carry into any fight is not swagger but options. Mixed martial arts rewards options. It is why the sport feels like the closest sanctioned thing to fighting rather than a game, built to display one chamber of the human engine. Boxing, for all its genius, selects a narrow slice of expression and polishes it until it gleams. Watch a master switch stances and paint with punches, distance measured like thread, timing that arrives half a beat ahead of hope, a jab that is not a touch but a thesis. It is art because it omits. In a world where legs and grabs and trips are banished, the hands learn to sing in a range no one else can reach. You can sit ringside and see the category error in real time. One man solving a puzzle the other hasn't studied. 2 games played on the same board. Step back into the cage and the board grows teeth. Dominance in MMA doesn't look like boxing's long argument. It looks like leverage. And leverage begins with the right to change phases. If the striking exchange stops favoring you, you are allowed to lie to physics with your level, to trade height for depth, to put your forehead into a chest and tell distance that it doesn't get a vote anymore. The clinch becomes a harbor, not a crime scene. The map becomes a map of all the places a man can lose without knowing how. None of this absolves fighting. It clarifies it. To argue that MMA can be safer than football or boxing on certain nights isn't to claim innocence for a sport built on consequence. It is to notice that finishing a fight early is not cruelty. It is mercy disguised as violence. It is to admit that cumulative harm is the quiet tyrant, that the punch you don't remember may love you more than the 100 you do. It is to thank the referee who recognizes posture as a language and stops the night because your body has said enough while your heart continues to lie. Rules are ethics with gloves on. We choose what to permit, and then the permitted changes us. The helmet saves skulls and endangered minds. The 10 count saved legends and extended symptoms. The stand-up ordered men to box when their bodies begged to hold. The unified rules outlawed headbutts, small joint attacks, groin shots, and in doing so, they edited the sport into something survivable. Every amendment to the rulebook is a footnote that reads, "We will keep the theater, but we will dim the tragedy where we can," and yet there is an ancient argument beneath all of it. Should everyone fight once? Not to hurt a stranger, but to stop lying to yourself. A hard roll in jiu-jitsu, where time suspends and you learn that taps are not surrender but grammar. A wrestling match where you discover that lungs are honest witnesses. A controlled spar where fear arrives like weather and leaves like weather, and you are still there when the sky clears. The lesson isn't violence. It's proportion. You are not fragile. You are also not invincible. People can smell fear. Confidence is not a speech you give yourself, but the absence of a scent you used to carry combat. In its safest forms is a mirror. It shows you how you behave when choice is stripped down to breath, posture, and attention. It shows you what you do when your plans vanish. It shows you whether panic owns you or you rent it by the minute and leave the room cleaner than you found it. The value of that mirror is not that it makes gladiators. It's that it makes citizens who understand cost, consequence, and calm, so we return to impact and its price. Helmets or no helmets, gloves or no gloves, the bill arrives the same way, slowly, with interest. What we can do is decide how the payments are structured. End nights early when the eyes tell the truth. Teach grappling so the hands have help. Map exits into the rulebook. Let artistry exist in the ring while honesty lives in the cage. And let both be watched by people who know what they're watching. We can love the spectacle and still discipline it. We can cheer for a knockout and still understand why a referee stopped wishing on a count of 7. We can admire a man who rises, and also wish he didn't have to. The studio falls quiet at the end. The way rooms do when the subject is something no one can fully solve. Sports will continue to bargain with physics. Cultures will continue to argue with themselves about what they can't live without. And somewhere, a kid will lace up, warm up, glove up, mouthpiece in, and learn a lesson he will carry long after his hands stop shaking. Rules don't save you. Awareness does. Technique does. Mercy does. And mercy often looks like the end of a fight.
Every sport is a promise we write to our bodies. Some are honest, some are beautiful lies. If impact is the hymn we keep singing, then let the arrangement be kinder. Fewer verses, clearer exits, enough silence to heal between the notes. Step in, test yourself, find the truth, and step out before the truth erases you. The crowd will cheer either way. Make sure your future self can still hear it.